When a man reaches 85, memory softens most wounds, but the deepest ones remain, quietly echoing through the years he thought he'd already lived. Al Pacino is not just an actor. He is a survivor of an era when American cinema was stripped bare, raw faces, long silences, and emotions that didn't ask permission. So, when Pacino, now 85, reflected on the 6 actors he struggled with the most, the first name carries the weight of mythology itself. Number 1, Marlon Brando. When Al Pacino stepped onto the set of The Godfather in the early 1970 seconds, he was still fighting for his place. Studio executives didn't want him. They doubted his look, his voice, his quiet intensity. Marlon Brando, on the other hand, was already a monument, an actor so powerful that the industry bent around him without question. Their pairing was historic, but it was never comfortable. Pacino has spoken, carefully and without drama, about the imbalance he felt during that time. Brando arrived late, improvised freely, challenged authority, and was praised for it. Pacino, younger and unproven, was expected to be disciplined, precise, invisible, unless perfect. That double standard cut deep. Not because Pacino lacked respect for Brando's talent, he didn't, but because he understood something unsettling very early. Greatness is not judged equally. There was admiration, yes. Brando's presence was transformative. His control of silence, his ability to command a scene without raising his voice, left a permanent mark on Pacino's understanding of power. But admiration does not cancel resentment. Watching the industry excuse behaviors in one man while scrutinizing another creates a quiet fracture, one that never fully heals. Awards season only sharpened that divide. When The Godfather dominated the Oscars, Brando won Best Actor. Pacino, whose screen time and emotional arc defined the film's heartbeat, was placed in the supporting category. To the public, it was a technical distinction. To Pacino, it felt like erasure. He did not attend the ceremony. He didn't protest loudly. He simply stepped away, and that pattern would follow him for decades. They never worked together again. Pacino has never attacked Brando in interviews. In fact, he often speaks of him with careful respect, choosing his words like a man handling something fragile and unresolved. But he also never romanticizes their relationship. There was no mentorship, no warmth, no passing of the torch. What existed was something colder and more complicated, a rivalry shaped not by words exchanged, but by what was never acknowledged. If you remember watching The Godfather for the first time, perhaps in a darkened theater or later on television, you could feel it. The tension wasn't just scripted, it lived between them. And for Pacino, that experience became a lesson he never forgot. Talent may earn admiration, but fairness is never guaranteed. Looking back now, Brando represents more than a difficult collaborator. He represents Pacino's first encounter with the unspoken rules of Hollywood rules that reward legend, punish youth, and leave long shadows behind. Number 2, Robert De Niro. To the public, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are cinematic brothers, two faces of the same era, two men who redefined American masculinity on screen. From The Godfather Part 2 to Heat, from Righteous Kill to The Irishman, their careers appear intertwined like parallel tracks running side by side. But parallel does not mean connected. Pacino has never pretended otherwise. They met early, both hungry, both intense, both deeply committed to the craft. Yet from the beginning, their approaches could not have been more different. De Niro was methodical, quiet, inward. He prepared obsessively, arriving on set with decisions already made. Pacino, by contrast, worked from instinct. He believed discovery happened in the moment, in breath, in movement, in unpredictability. At first, this difference created mutual respect. Each man recognized the other's seriousness. But respect, over time, hardened into distance. On the set of Heat in the mid-1990 seconds, the anticipation was enormous. It was the first time Pacino and De Niro would share a scene face-to-face. The diner sequence is now legendary, two masters circling one another, restrained, watchful, electric. What audiences didn't see was how carefully separated they were behind the scenes. They rarely spoke outside of takes. There were no shared meals, no easy conversations, no camaraderie. Director Michael Mann understood what he was dealing with. He treated them not as collaborators, but as opposing forces. Each actor was directed differently, protected from the other's process. It worked for the film. It did nothing for their relationship. Pacino once described De Niro as a craftsman. It sounds like praise, and in many ways it is, but it also reveals distance. Craft is something you admire from across the room. It is not intimacy. De Niro, for his part, has spoken of Pacino with similar restraint, offering polite acknowledgement without warmth. Neither man ever leaned into the mythology the public wanted them to embrace. As the years passed, the distance became a quiet certainty. During The Irishman, decades later, both men were older, reflective, carrying the weight of long careers. You might expect time to soften old divisions. Instead, it clarified them. Sources close to the production described an atmosphere of professionalism stripped of personal connection. Martin Scorsese himself reportedly acted as a bridge, ensuring the balance held. Pacino has said, bluntly, "We're not friends. We just show up." For some, that honesty feels refreshing. For others, it feels sad. But for Pacino, it is simply truth. He never sought rivalry with De Niro, but he never sought closeness either. Their shared history is one of mutual recognition without emotional exchange, a coexistence, not a bond. If you grew up watching their films, you may have assumed something richer existed behind the scenes. The idea that two men who gave us so many unforgettable moments would share laughter, stories, friendship, the reality is quieter and perhaps more revealing. Greatness does not always attract harmony. Sometimes it creates silence. The third name brings Pacino back to a moment when he was still defining himself not against another actor, but against authority. Number 3, William Friedkin. When Pacino agreed to work with director William Friedkin on Cruising in 1980, it seemed like a natural pairing. Friedkin had just come off the massive success of The French Connection. Pacino was entering a phase of his career where he sought darker, riskier material. On paper, it was a collaboration built on ambition. In reality, it unraveled almost immediately. Friedkin was known for discipline and control. He expected actors to arrive fully prepared, lines memorized, movements precise. Pacino, however, was entering a period of artistic experimentation. He questioned structure. He resisted rigidity. He believed the character should dictate the process, not the schedule. The clash was immediate and intense. Friedkin later accused Pacino of being unprepared, of improvising excessively, of disrespecting the rhythm of the set. Pacino, on the other hand, felt stifled. He believed Friedkin's authority left no room for emotional exploration. What one man saw as chaos, the other saw as freedom. The tension never exploded publicly. There were no dramatic walkouts, no tabloid scandals. Instead, it simmered long nights, raised voices, then silence. Friedkin once referred to Pacino as the biggest disappointment he had worked with. Pacino never responded directly. He didn't need to. They never worked together again. In Hollywood, that absence speaks louder than any insult. There were no reconciliations, no retrospective praise, no shared panels or interviews. Each man moved forward as if the other no longer existed. For Pacino, this experience reinforced something he had already begun to understand. Collaboration only works when respect flows both ways. Without it, separation is inevitable. By this point in his life, Pacino had learned how to walk away, not angrily, not loudly, but permanently. And that lesson would surface again in the relationships still to come. Number 4, James Foley. When Glengarry Glen Ross was released in 1992, it landed with force, sharp dialogue, ruthless performances, a film that felt like a knife drawn slowly across the throat of American ambition. At the center of it all was Al Pacino, delivering one of the most explosive monologues of his career. On screen, everything worked. Off screen, very little did. James Foley was a director known for control, for visual precision, for maintaining order in emotionally volatile material. Pacino, by this point in his career, had grown increasingly resistant to predictability. He wanted flexibility. He wanted to feel the scene differently each time. Foley wanted consistency. The two philosophies collided almost immediately. Pacino would change tone mid-take, rework lines, lean into instinct rather than repetition. Foley found it exhausting. Crew members later recalled a set charged with tension, not loud, not chaotic, but strained. Like a conversation where both parties are speaking fluently, but in different languages. There was no dramatic fallout, no shouting matches that became legend. Instead, there was a mutual decision never to repeat the experience. After the film's success, Pacino moved on. Foley moved on. And when asked years later whether he would work with Pacino again, Foley's answer was measured, polite, and final. Sometimes the deepest rifts aren't marked by anger. They're marked by absence. For Pacino, this relationship reinforced an internal rule he lived by. When the rhythm is wrong, don't force the music. Walk away quietly. Let the work stand on its own. And never return to a place where the cost of collaboration outweighs its reward. The fifth name brings us back to one of Pacino's most iconic films, and to a co-star whose success ultimately proved him wrong. Number 5. Michelle Pfeiffer. When casting began for Scarface in the early 1980 seconds, Michelle Pfeiffer was not the obvious choice. She was young, relatively untested, still shaping her screen identity. Al Pacino, already established, had doubts. He questioned whether she had the hardness, the emotional armor required to play Elvira Hancock, Tony Montana's icy, unreachable counterpart. Pfeiffer later admitted she felt his resistance immediately. She could sense that Pacino did not want her there. For a young actress trying to prove herself, that kind of disapproval can be paralyzing. But Pfeiffer pushed through it. Her audition convinced director Brian De Palma to overrule Pacino's objections. The decision was final. The tension was not. On set, Pacino kept his distance. There were no warm rehearsals, no mentoring moments. Their interactions remained strictly professional, stripped of any personal connection. Pfeiffer has spoken respectfully of Pacino, acknowledging both his brilliance and the emotional chill that defined their working relationship. Ironically, her performance became one of the film's most haunting elements. Vulnerable yet sharp, distant yet wounded, Pfeiffer gave Elvira a depth that helped turn Scarface into a lasting cultural touchstone. Time proved her casting right. Pacino never publicly revisited his initial doubts, but he never sought another collaboration either. In this case, the fracture wasn't born of ego or rivalry. It was born of misjudgment and perhaps the discomfort of being proven wrong. For Pacino, pride has always been intertwined with instinct. When instinct fails, the reckoning can be uncomfortable. They never worked together again. The sixth and final name brings us to a man whose bluntness clashed directly with Pacino's introspection and whose presence left no room for compromise. Number 6. Gene Hackman. Scarecrow, released in 1973, paired two rising forces, Gene Hackman and Al Pacino. The film itself was quiet, character-driven, and deeply human. On screen, their chemistry was understated but effective. Behind the scenes, however, their differences were impossible to ignore. Hackman was efficient, direct, impatient with ambiguity. He valued momentum and clarity. Pacino, still early in his rise, was exploratory, sensitive, willing to linger inside a moment until it revealed itself. To Hackman, this felt like wasted time. To Pacino, Hackman's approach felt dismissive of emotional truth. Crew members later described a set where tension hovered constantly, never exploding but never dissolving either. Hackman challenged scenes openly. Pacino withdrew. Neither man bent. Pacino later described the experience with characteristic restraint. "It wasn't the easiest," he said. That understatement carried weight. There were no fond recollections, no nostalgia, just acknowledgement of incompatibility. After Scarecrow, their paths never crossed again. In an industry built on second chances, that silence speaks volumes. Two men of immense talent, unwilling or unable to meet in the middle. For Pacino, this collaboration reinforced a belief he would carry throughout his career. Emotional safety matters. Without it, the work suffers, and so does the artist. By the time these 6 relationships had faded into history, Pacino had learned something essential about himself. He could forgive mistakes, he could endure criticism, but when respect fractured beyond repair, he closed the door and never reopened it. Looking across these 6 names, a pattern emerges, one that says as much about Al Pacino as it does about the people he left behind. These were not grudges fueled by vanity or public feuds staged for attention. They were quiet separations, shaped by incompatible temperaments, wounded pride, and a lifelong refusal to compromise the emotional core of his work. Pacino wasn't cataloging enemies. He was acknowledging fractures that time never healed. What these stories reveal is a man guided almost entirely by instinct. Pacino trusted feeling over diplomacy, truth over comfort. That devotion gave us performances that still resonate decades later, but it also came at a cost. Collaboration requires surrender, and surrender was never his strength. Instead, he chose distance, believing silence to be more honest than forced reconciliation. Decades later, Pacino's legacy stands firm not because he avoided conflict, but because he never pretended it didn't exist. His era was one of raw expression, when artists were allowed to be difficult, imperfect, and emotionally exposed. In naming these 6 actors, he wasn't reopening old wounds. He was closing the circle, finally allowing the past to speak in its own quiet voice. Pacino once said, "The hardest thing about being an actor is not playing the role, it's surviving what the role takes from you." At 85, those words feel less like reflection and more like truth earned the long way. And if you remember watching his films as they first appeared, you know exactly what that cost looked like.